As kinetic projectiles shredded alien flesh and human blood vaporized in the void of space, Captain Patrick Green calmly read his tattered copy of The Art of War, as if the battle for Zeta Reticuli was just another training scenario in the simulator. The United Terran Federation battleship Indomitable shuddered under the onslaught of Talaxian weapons fire. Consoles sparked and exploded. The air smelled like fried electronics and ozone. A power surge made the lights go out, then flicker back on. "Shields at 30%, Ensign David Rodriguez shouted over the din of battle. "Forward railguns offline," Lieutenant Commander Michael Chen said. "Capacitors overloaded." Captain Green licked his finger and turned the page. The spine of the ancient book was held together by duct tape and sheer force of will. On the view screen, the angular obsidian bulk of the Talaxian flagship loomed. Its spinal railgun glowed red as it prepared to fire. One hit from that thing could core the Indomitable like an apple. "All hands brace for impact," Captain Green said. He glanced up from his book and tapped a command into the arm console on his chair. The Indomitable lurched to port and dove into a nearby asteroid field. The crew held on for dear life as the inertial compensators struggled to keep up. Asteroids whizzed by, filling the view screen. Captain Green lazily drifted his finger across the plot screen, picking a path through the chaotic tumble of rocks with nothing but math and intuition. He turned another page. If they couldn't get to the dark side of one of these planetoids and buy time for repairs, the Indomitable would be space dust. The Talaxian flagship would pick them off with its superior firepower. All of humanity was counting on the Indomitable reaching the Zeta Reticuli jump gate. Without those critical reinforcements from Earth, the UTF position in the system would collapse. Thousands of human lives hung in the balance, all because of one alien captain, and one human captain trying to outmaneuver and outgun each other in the cold depths of space. The Talaxian commander, Sire Father Zorax, watched the impossible unfold on his own view screen. His claw clenched on the armrest of his command chair, his teeth bared in what passed for a grin among his species. The human captain was reading a book as if his life and the lives of his crew didn't hang by a thread. Was this confidence, arrogance, insanity? The Sire Father didn't know which, and he didn't care. He would reduce the human ship to molten slag and send the crew screaming to the void. Let the hairless apes read all the books they wanted in the afterlife. The Indomitable burst from the asteroid field like a bat out of hell, its engines blazing. Captain Green closed his book with a snap. "Weapons. Fire everything we've got at that flagship." "Aye, Captain. Missiles away, railguns firing." Lieutenant Commander Chen's fingers flew over the weapons console. The ship shuddered as a full spread of missiles launched from the tubes, streaking towards the obsidian bulk of the Talaxian ship. The railguns mounted along the Indomitable's hull sent slugs the size of tanks screaming through the void. Sire Father Zorax snarled as the human weapons slammed into his ship's shields. Alarms blared. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. "Damage report!" "Shields have failed, Sire Father. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. The weapons officer ducked as his station erupted in flames. The Talaxian ship shook as the human missiles found their mark. Explosions blossomed along the black hull. Plumes of atmosphere and debris geysered into space. "Emergency warp jump now," Zorax shouted. "Get us out of here." The flagship's warp drive powered up with a rising hum. A wormhole tore open in the fabric of spacetime. The Talaxian ship, trailing smoke and flames, vanished into the portal. The wormhole snapped shut behind it. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Green allowed himself a small smile as he watched the enemy ship flee. "Helm, pursuit course. Track that warp signature." "Aye, sir, laying in a pursuit vector now," Ensign Rodriguez said. The Indomitable's own warp drive spun up. The ship leaped forward, chasing the Talaxians through the higher dimensions of warp space. Stars became smears of light. The Indomitable emerged from warp in a binary star system, the twin stars blazing in the view screen. And there, orbiting the larger of the two stars like a malevolent moon, was a massive Talaxian battle station. The Forge, bristling with weapons and surrounded by a fleet of angular black warships. The Talaxian flagship limped towards the station, still spewing smoke and debris. He stood and started pacing the bridge, his eyes alight with possibilities. This was an opportunity humanity couldn't pass up. Taking out the forge would cripple the Talaxian war machine. Captain Green flipped open his book, rapidly scanning the pages. The words of Sun Tzu, written centuries ago, still rang true. He snapped the book shut. A plan was forming. On the forge, Sire Father Zorax stormed onto the command deck, his face a mask of rage. "Status report, how did the humans find this place?" "Unknown, Sire Father," his second-in-command said. "Our sensors have detected a single human ship approaching. It's the one from the asteroid field." "So the hairless ape followed us," Zorax growled. "Engage that ship with the fleet. I want it destroyed. No one humiliates the Talaxian Empire and lives." The Talaxian ships peeled away from the station and burned on intercept courses towards the Indomitable. Zorax watched the tactical display with bared teeth. The human ship wasn't even trying to evade. It was charging straight at the forge like a mad animal. On the Indomitable's bridge, Captain Green watched the approaching Talaxian ships with a glint in his eye. The odds were against them. By all logic, he should order a retreat, but he had a plan. A dangerous, reckless, brilliant plan. Ensign Rodriguez glanced over his shoulder. "Sir, we'll be right in their crossfire." "I know." Captain Green sat back in his chair and opened his book. "Trust me, this is going to be one for the history books." The Indomitable surged forward, the Talaxian fleet closing in like a pack of wolves. The ship shook as the first enemy shots struck the shields. Consoles sparked. Crew members held on as the deck bucked. The battle for the forge had begun. The Indomitable shook and shuddered as Talaxian weapons fire slammed into its battered hull. Sparks showered the bridge, the lights flickering. Captain Green hardly seemed to notice, his nose buried in his book as he barked out orders. "Chen, get a boarding party ready. I want our best Marines armed and ready to go in 5 minutes." "Aye, sir," Chen said, already typing commands into his console. "Sergeant Taylor and his team will be prepped and in the pods before you can say Semper Fi." Down in the armory, Sergeant John Taylor and his squad of elite UTF Marines were suiting up in sleek black power armor, the servos whirring as they moved. They grabbed plasma rifles from the racks, the weapons humming with barely contained energy. "All right, ladies, you heard the man," Taylor said, his voice gruff. "We're going to board that ugly son of a bitch and show these Talaxian bastards what happens when you mess with the UTF." The Marines nodded, their faces set with determination behind their polarized visors. They boarded the assault pods, strapping in and running final weapons checks. Back on the bridge, Green watched the tactical display as the Indomitable closed in on the forge. The massive station filled the view screen, its surface bristling with weapons batteries. "Fire the EMP missiles," Green ordered. "I want that station's defenses offline." A salvo of missiles streaked from the Indomitable's launch tubes, arcing towards the forge. They detonated in a series of blinding flashes, washing over the station in a wave of electromagnetic energy. The forge's lights flickered and died, its weapons falling silent. "Defenses are down," Chen reported. "The boarding team is ready to launch." Green nodded. "Ram the station. Make us a nice big hole to board through." The Indomitable surged forward, its engines flaring. It slammed into the forge's hull with a tremendous crash, metal shrieking and tearing. The assault pods launched from the UTF ship, streaking through the breach and into the station. "Atlas, you have the con," Green said, not looking up from his book. "Get us clear of the station and keep those Talaxian ships off our back." "Affirmative, Captain," the ship's AI responded, its voice calm and measured. "I will engage the enemy fleet and provide covering fire for the boarding team." The Indomitable peeled away from the forge, its weapons blazing as Atlas guided it into the fray. The ship ducked and weaved through the Talaxian fire with inhuman precision, its railguns and missiles picking off enemy ships one by one. Inside the forge, Sergeant Taylor and his Marines emerged from their pods into a scene of chaos. Alarms blared, and emergency lights flashed red. Talaxian security forces, caught off guard by the sudden attack, rushed to respond. The Marines opened fire, their plasma rifles spitting bolts of searing blue energy. The plasma cut through the Talaxian armor like it was paper, the aliens falling in charred heaps. Taylor led the charge, his rifle blazing as he advanced down the smoke-filled corridors. On the station's command deck, Sire Father Zorak slammed his fist on the arm of his chair as reports of the human boarding action flooded in. His eyes narrowed to slits, his sharp teeth bared in a snarl. "Send in the Shadow Guard," he growled. "I want those humans dead." Commander Vrax, leader of the Talaxian Shadow Guard, bowed his head. "It will be done, Sire Father. We will repel these invaders and make them pay for their insolence." The Shadow Guard, the most elite warriors of the Talaxian military, moved to intercept the Marines. They were a formidable sight in their midnight black armor, their wrist blades glinting in the emergency lights. The two forces clashed in a sprawling hangar bay, a fierce firefight erupting amidst the wreckage of Talaxian fighters and machinery. Plasma bolts and razor-sharp discs filled the air. Marines and Shadow Guard fell on both sides, their blood mixing on the deck plates. Taylor ducked behind a smoldering fighter wing, plasma bolts sizzling overhead. His rifle was running hot, the power cell nearly drained. He slammed in a fresh cell and popped up, putting a bolt right through the visor of a charging Shadow Guard. But for every guard that fell, two more seemed to take their place. They knew the layout of the station, using the machinery and wreckage for cover as they laid down suppressing fire. The Marines were slowly being driven back, forced to give ground. Taylor gritted his teeth as a plasma bolt seared across his armor, leaving a molten scar. The Shadow Guard were good, but his Marines were better. They just needed to hold out a little longer to complete their mission. Whatever that mission was. Green hadn't exactly been forthcoming with the details, but Taylor trusted his captain. He trusted that ramming an enemy station and boarding it with a few dozen Marines was all part of some brilliant plan. At least he hoped it was, because right now, pinned down and outnumbered in the heart of a Talaxian stronghold, brilliant was about the only thing that was going to get them out of this mess alive. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Green's comm crackled to life. Admiral Jack Warner's grizzled face appeared on the screen. "Captain, we've got a problem. Long-range sensors have detected a Talaxian invasion fleet heading your way. ETA is 2 hours. Green's grip tightened on his book. "How many ships?" "At least 50, including a dozen dreadnoughts. They're coming to reinforce the forge. If they get there before you destroy it, this whole sector could fall to the Talaxians." Green nodded, his face grim. "Understood, Admiral. We'll get it done." The screen went dark. Green turned to his crew. "You heard the man. We're on the clock. Chen, get me a line to Sergeant Taylor." Down in the forge's hangar bay, Taylor and his Marines were pinned down, plasma fire sizzling overhead. His comm buzzed. "Taylor, this is Green. Sit rep." Taylor ducked as a plasma bolt nearly took his head off. "We're taking heavy fire from the Shadow Guard. We've lost Jenkins and Ramirez. We're running low on ammo." Green's voice was calm, almost casual. "Listen carefully, Sergeant. There's a Talaxian fleet on its way. If they reach the forge, this all will have been for nothing. I need you to get to the station's reactor core and overload it. Blow this place to hell." Taylor gritted his teeth. "Understood, sir. We'll get it done or die trying." Taylor turned to his remaining Marines. "You heard the captain. We're going for the reactor. Move out and stay close." Private Hicks went down, a blade buried in his chest. Corporal Vasquez avenged him, putting a plasma bolt through the guard's visor. They fought their way through the hangar, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. They reached the reactor control room. Taylor kicked the door open. Inside, Talaxian engineers scrambled for cover. The Marines stormed in, guns blazing. It was a slaughter. Taylor rushed to the reactor controls as his men secured the room. He started inputting the overload sequence. "Cover me! This is going to take a minute." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the door exploded inward. Commander Vrax strode in, flanked by a squad of Shadow Guard. The Talaxian's eyes burned with hatred. "You dare defile the forge with your presence, human filth. I will take great pleasure in killing you slowly." Vrax charged, his wrist blades extended. The Marines opened fire, but the Shadow Guard were too fast, too agile. They closed the distance in seconds. It was a brutal melee, a whirlwind of blades and rifle butts. Marines fell, their blood splattering the walls, but they made the Talaxians pay for every inch. Taylor finished the overload sequence just as Vrax reached him. The Talaxian's blade punched through his armor, into his gut. Taylor gasped, blood bubbling from his lips. But he smiled. "Too late, asshole." Vrax's eyes widened as he saw the reactor controls. The core was going critical. There was no stopping it now. Taylor grabbed Vrax, holding him close, even as the Talaxian twisted the blade in his gut. "Burn in hell!" The few remaining Marines primed their plasma grenades and charged the Shadow Guard, screaming defiance. The grenades detonated, vaporizing human and Talaxian alike in searing blue light. The chain reaction reached the reactor core. For a moment there was a blinding flash visible even from space. Then the forge exploded, a miniature sun birthing in the darkness. The shockwave annihilated nearby Talaxian ships, turning them to atoms. The rest were tossed about like toys, shields failing, hulls rupturing. On the bridge of the Indomitable, the view screen filled with the swirling colors of the nebula as the ship plunged into its depths. The crew braced themselves, the inertial dampeners straining to compensate for the turbulence. Captain Green stood, his book still in hand, his eyes focused on the tactical display. "Chen, launch the probes. Let's give our Talaxian friends something to chase." "Aye, Captain. Launching probes now." Chen's fingers danced over the console, sending a dozen sensor probes streaking out into the nebula. The probes began transmitting false sensor readings, ghostly echoes of the Indomitable scattered throughout the gas clouds. On the screens of the Talaxian fleet, it appeared as if the human ship had somehow multiplied, its signature appearing in a dozen different locations. "All ships open fire," High Admiral Zerax shouted, his voice booming over the comm. "Destroy them all." The Talaxian ships began firing blindly into the nebula, their weapons locking onto the false signatures. Beams of energy crisscrossed the swirling clouds, the Talaxians inadvertently firing upon each other in the confusion. Sci-Father Zorax, standing on the bridge of his flagship, watched the chaos unfold with growing rage. "Ceasefire," he roared. "You fools, can't you see it's a trick?" The Talaxian ship stopped firing, the echoes of their weapons fading into the nebula's depths. Zorax turned to his communications officer. "Get me Captain Draxus, now." A moment later, the image of a young Talaxian appeared on the screen, his black flight suit adorned with the red insignia of the Phantom Fighters. "Sire-Father, how may I serve?" "Take your squadron and find that human ship," Zorax snarled. "I don't care how you do it, just find them and destroy them." "As you command, Sire-Father." Draxus's image winked out. In the hangar bay of Zorax's flagship, a dozen sleek black fighters powered up, their engines humming with barely contained energy. These were the Phantom Fighters, the most advanced stealth ships in the Talaxian fleet, piloted by the best of the best. Captain Draxus strapped himself into the cockpit of his fighter, his hands dancing over the controls. "All Phantoms, engage cloaking devices. Let's hunt some humans." The fighters shimmered and vanished, blending into the blackness of space as they slipped into the nebula. Their advanced sensors probed the gas clouds, filtering out the false readings, searching for the real Indomitable. Green narrowed his eyes. "Phantom Fighters, Zorax is best." He turned to Chen. "Bring the point defense grid online. We can't see them, but we can still fill the sky with flak." The Indomitable's hull bristled as dozens of point defense turrets emerged, their barrels swiveling to track the incoming fighters. They opened fire, filling the space around the ship with a web of tracer rounds and energy beams. The Phantom Fighters wove through the fire, their cloaking devices shimmering as they strained to maintain invisibility. They struck like ghosts, appearing just long enough to unleash a barrage of missiles and energy beams before vanishing again. The Indomitable shuddered under the onslaught, its shields flickering. On the bridge, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, crew members thrown from their seats. Green held onto his chair, his knuckles white. Damage report. "Shields at 50%, Chen shouted over the alarms. "Hull breaches on deck 7 and 12. Another hit rocked the ship, throwing Green from his chair. His book skidded across the deck. He crawled after it, snatching it up just as another explosion sent a shower of sparks raining down on him. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the ancient text. There had to be something, some strategy he could use. The Indomitable couldn't take much more of this. Draxus's fighter streaked past the Indomitable's bridge, so close Green could see the Talaxian's face through the cockpit canopy. The pilot's eyes met his for a split second before he vanished again, cloaked in darkness. Green's eyes fell on a passage in his book, a tactic used by an ancient Earth general. A small smile tugged at his lips. It was risky, but it just might work. He pulled himself back into his chair. "Chen, I need you to vent the deuterium tanks. Pump it out into space as much as you can." Chen stared at him. "Captain, that's our fuel. If we vent it—" "Just do it," Green snapped. "Trust me." Chen nodded, his fingers flying over the console. Outside, a stream of glowing blue liquid began to vent from the Indomitable's tanks, forming a growing cloud around the ship. The Phantom fighters, their cloaking devices already strained, flew right into it. The deuterium coated their hulls, the highly volatile fuel reacting with their energy shields. Suddenly, they were visible, their black hulls glowing blue. The Indomitable's weapons opened up, the deuterium providing a perfect targeting solution. The Phantom fighters exploded one by one, torn apart by the human ship's guns. Draxus's fighter spun away, trailing smoke and fire. "All Phantoms retreat, get clear of the cloud." But it was too late. The last of the fighters exploded, consumed by the flames of the deuterium. The Indomitable emerged from the cloud, battered but victorious. On the bridge of his flagship, Sire-Father Zorax watched in disbelief as his elite fighters were destroyed. His claws dug into the armrests of his chair, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over, human," he snarled. "I will have my revenge, I swear it." He turned to his communications officer. "Get me High Admiral Zarax. Tell him to bring the fleet in. We end this now." As the Talaxian fleet moved to surround the Indomitable, Captain Green sat back in his chair, his book open on his lap. The battle was far from over, but for now they had survived. They had made the Talaxians bleed. And as long as he had his wits, his crew, and the wisdom of those who had fought before, Green knew they would keep on fighting. To the last ship, to the last man, to the last page of his book. The war raged on, the nebula lit by the fires of battle, human and Talaxian locked in a deadly embrace. And in the heart of it all, one ship and one captain, fighting not just for their lives, but for the fate of all humanity. "Aye, Captain," Chen replied. "We're on our way." In the maintenance bay, Green met with Chen and the engineers. Damaged drones lay scattered about, victims of the Phantom fighters' precision strikes. Green picked up a drone, turning it over in his hands. "We're going to turn these into decoys, outfit them with boosted sensor arrays, and pack them with explosives." The engineers got to work, modifying the drones under Green's watchful eye. They worked quickly, stripping the drones down to their frames and rebuilding them with new purpose. "Make sure the sensor signatures match the Indomitables," Green said. "We want the Talaxians to think these are the real deal." Within the hour, the decoy drones were ready. Green had them loaded into launch tubes, their deadly payload primed. On the bridge, Green watched the tactical display. The Phantom fighters darted through the nebula, invisible to sensors, but leaving telltale ripples in the gas. The decoys shot out into the nebula, their boosted sensors painting false readings across the Talaxians' screens. To the Phantom fighters, it looked like the Indomitable had suddenly multiplied. "They're taking the bait," Chen said, a grin on his face. "The fighters are breaking formation, targeting the drones." Green's finger hovered over the detonator. He waited, letting the Talaxians commit. The fighters closed in on the drones, their weapons hot. The drones exploded, their payloads igniting the nebula's volatile gases. A chain reaction swept through the clouds, the shockwave catching the phantom fighters in its wake. Talaxian ships spun out of control, some shredding apart in the blast. Others limped away, trailing debris and plasma. On his flagship, Sire-Father Zorax slammed his fist on the arm of his chair as he watched his elite fighters fall to the humans' trickery. His eyes burned with hate. The Talaxian fleet surged forward, their shields reconfigured to withstand the turbulent nebula. Weapons bristled along their hulls, hungry for human blood. On the Indomitable's bridge, Green watched their approach with a calm born of desperation. They couldn't outrun the Talaxians, not in the nebula. They had to outthink them. "Helm, take us deeper in," Green ordered, towards the stellar nursery. The Indomitable dove into the heart of the nebula, where new stars struggled to be born. The ship shook as it passed through waves of gas and dust, the hull groaning under the strain. Ahead, a massive protostar glowed with the heat of 1,000 suns. Its gravity tugged at the Indomitable, threatening to pull the ship in. "Bring us in close," Green said. "Use the star's gravity to slingshot us around. It should shield us from their sensors." The helmsman complied, guiding the ship into a tight orbit around the protostar. The Indomitable's hull blazed with reflected light, the ship lost in the glare. Zorax saw the human ship disappear into the protostar's corona. He bared his teeth in a snarl. "Follow them," he ordered. "They won't escape us this time." The Talaxian fleet plunged after the Indomitable, their ship straining against the protostar's immense gravity. Shields flared as radiation bombarded the hulls. "Admiral, this is madness," one of the captains said over the comm. "The star's gravity is tearing us apart." "Silence," Zorax roared. "I will have that human ship, even if I have to chase it into the fires of creation itself." The Indomitable and the Talaxian fleet danced a deadly ballet around the newborn star, the fate of the war hanging in the balance. One mistake, one miscalculation, and they would all be consumed by the stellar inferno. But Green kept his eyes on his book, trusting in the words of the ancients to guide him. The Indomitable threaded the needle, using the star's gravity to stay one step ahead of the Talaxians. It couldn't last forever, Green knew. Sooner or later the Talaxians would catch them, or the star would, but he would make them fight for every inch, every second. The war raged on, the nebula lit by the fire of the newborn star and the flash of weapons, and at the heart of it, the Indomitable, a single ship against an empire, refusing to surrender. Green turned a page in his book. The battle was far from over. The Talaxian fleet surged towards the protostar, weapons primed and shields straining against the intense radiation. On the bridge of the flagship, High Admiral Zorax watched the stellar behemoth grow larger on the view screen, its swirling surface a maelstrom of nuclear fire. "Admiral, the gravitational forces are tearing us apart," a bridge officer shouted, his console sparking. The ship shuddered, the hull groaning under the immense stress. Zorax gripped the armrests of his command chair as a smaller Talaxian vessel, caught in the protostar's gravitational pull, was shredded before his eyes. The ship broke apart, its crew consumed by the stellar furnace. "Pull back," Zorax ordered, his voice strained. "Get us out of here." But it was too late for one of the battleships. The massive vessel, its shields failing, was dragged inexorably towards the protostar. The hull buckled and warped, the ship stretched like taffy by the immense tidal forces. Escape pods jettisoned from the dying ship, only to be swallowed by the stellar maelstrom. On the Indomitable's bridge, Captain Green watched the Talaxian fleet's plight with a calculating eye. "Helm, bring us about. Use the protostar's gravity to slingshot us around." The helmsman complied, plotting a daring course that skimmed the edge of the protostar's gravity well. The Indomitable shuddered as it was caught in the star's grip, the inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. The ship shot around the protostar, the maneuver flinging them clear of the nebula at tremendous speed. The stars blurred on the view screen, as the Indomitable hurtled through space. "Weapons lock on to the damaged Talaxian ships," Green ordered. "Fire at will." The Indomitable's guns opened up, missiles and beams of energy slashing through space. The Talaxian ships, still reeling from their brush with the protostar, were caught completely off guard. Hulls ruptured, decks decompressed, and ships spun out of control, venting atmosphere and debris. On his shuttle, Sire-Father Zorax watched the carnage unfold, his claws digging into the armrests. The human ship moved with a speed and grace that belied its size, dancing through the Talaxian formation and leaving destruction in its wake. As the battered Talaxian fleet limped away, Captain Green allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. But it was short-lived. Admiral Warner's face appeared on the view screen, his expression grave. Green leaned forward, his eyes intent. "What do you need me to do, Admiral?" "I need you to lead a covert mission," Warner said. "Infiltrate that base and destroy the weapon before the Talaxians can use it. The fate of the UTF could depend on it." Green nodded, his grip tightening on his book. "Understood, Admiral. We'll get it done." As the transmission ended, Green turned to his crew, his eyes alight with purpose. They had won a victory today, but the war was far from over. And if the Talaxians completed this new weapon, it might be a war humanity could not win. Captain Green sat in his ready room, the weight of Admiral Warner's orders heavy on his shoulders. The Indomitable had to strike at the heart of the Talaxian war machine, a secret research base developing a weapon that could turn the tide of the conflict. He had to act fast before the Talaxians could unleash their new horror on the UTF. Green activated the ship's intercom. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, report to the ready room. Bring your team leaders." Minutes later, the door slid open and Lieutenant James Rodriguez strode in, flanked by his squad leaders. They were the best of the best, UTF Special Forces operators who had seen action on a dozen worlds. Green nodded. "We have a mission, a covert insertion onto a Talaxian moon base. There's a weapon there, something big. We need to destroy it before they can use it against us." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "What kind of weapon?" "We don't know the specifics," Green admitted, "but intel suggests it's a game changer, something that could neuter our tactics, predict our every move." The Spec Ops soldiers exchanged glances. They knew the stakes, the price of failure. "When do we leave?" Rodriguez asked. "Immediately," Green said. He handed Rodriguez a datapad. "The Indomitable will get you close. After that, you're on your own. Get in, destroy the weapon, and get out. Sending you to Hangar Bay 2 immediately with your squad and the best equipment we've got. Estimated time of arrival 4 hours. The Indomitable's en route to this research base as we speak." Rodriguez nodded sharply. "We'll get it done, Captain, whatever it takes." As the Spec Ops team filed out of the ready room, Green turned to the viewport. The stars streaked by as the Indomitable hurtled through space, racing towards a confrontation that could decide the fate of humanity. 4 hours later, the Indomitable dropped out of warp at the edge of the Talaxian system. The moon base hung in space ahead, a heavily fortified installation bristling with weapons and sensors. "Atlas, can you get me a backdoor into their sensor net?" he asked, turning to the ship's AI avatar. "Affirmative, Captain," Atlas replied, her holographic form pulsing with lines of code. "I've identified a vulnerability in their firewall. I can create a blind spot in their coverage, but it will only last for a few minutes." Green nodded. "Do it. As soon as that hole opens up, launch the Spec Ops team." Down in the hangar bay, Rodriguez and his team boarded a sleek black dropship. They were kitted out in the latest UTF stealth gear, their weapons and equipment optimized for covert operations. The dropship's engines hummed to life, the craft lifting off the deck and gliding out of the hangar bay. As it cleared the Indomitable, its cloaking device engaged, the ship vanishing from sight and sensor. On the moon's surface, Talaxian patrols swept the perimeter of the research base, their weapons at the ready. Sensor towers scanned the sky, vigilant for any sign of intrusion. But they didn't detect the cloaked UTF dropship as it slipped through their net, settling onto the rocky ground a kilometer from the base. The hatch opened, and Rodriguez's team emerged, their stealth suits blending into the terrain. They moved quickly and quietly, evading patrols and sensor sweeps with practiced ease. When a Talaxian guard post blocked their path, they used a combination of hacking and sabotage to create a diversion, slipping past in the confusion. At the base's perimeter wall, Rodriguez placed a breaching charge, the explosive adhering to the metal surface. He triggered the detonator, and the charge exploded inward, the directed blast punching a hole in the wall without alerting the base's defenders. The team slipped inside, moving through the base's industrial corridors like ghosts. When they encountered Talaxian soldiers or technicians, they used silent takedowns, choking them out or snapping necks with brutal efficiency. They reached the main research lab, the heart of the base. Rodriguez hacked the lock and the door slid open, revealing a cavernous space filled with advanced technology. And there, in the center of the room, was their target. It was a ship, but unlike any Rodriguez had ever seen. Sleek and angular, it had the black sheen of Talaxian alloy, but its lines were almost organic, as if grown rather than built. And there was something else, a palpable aura of menace that seemed to emanate from the vessel. He pulled out a bundle of high-yield explosives, tossing them to his team members. "Plant these charges on the ship's reactor, the main power conduits, and the data cores. We need to make sure there's nothing left for the Talaxians to salvage." The team split up, moving through the lab with practiced efficiency. They planted the explosives at key points, the charges magnetically adhering to the ship's hull and the lab's infrastructure. Rodriguez placed the final charge on the ship's reactor housing. As he armed the detonator, a cold voice spoke from the shadows. "Did you really think it would be that easy, human?" Rodriguez spun, his rifle snapping up. Standing there in the entrance to the lab was a figure clad in the midnight black armor of the Talaxian Shadow Guard. But this was no ordinary guard. Rodriguez recognized the insignia on the armor, the distinctive markings of rank and status. "Commander Vrax," he said, his voice tight, "I thought you died on the forge." Vrax laughed, a harsh grating sound. "You humans have a habit of underestimating us, a mistake you won't live to repeat." He gestured, and a dozen shadow guards emerged from the darkness, their wrist blades extended. They moved to surround Rodriguez and his team, their stances poised and deadly. Rodriguez's finger hovered over the detonator trigger. He knew he could end this now, blow the charges and take the Talaxians with him, but his team was spread out across the lab, and the shadow guards were between them and the exit. He made a decision. "Go loud!" he shouted, and opened fire. The lab erupted into a fierce close-quarters battle, plasma bolts and razor discs filling the air. The UTF soldiers fought with desperate skill, their advanced weapons and training pitted against the Shadow Guard's superior numbers and ferocity. Rodriguez ducked under a slashing wrist blade, driving his combat knife into a guard's throat. He fired his rifle one-handed, the plasma bolts burning through black armor and alien flesh. But the guards kept coming, and the UTF soldiers started to fall. Rodriguez saw one of his men go down, a razor disc embedded in his chest. Another was cut down by a flurry of wrist blades, his stealth suit shredded and bloody. Rodriguez fought his way to the center of the lab, his rifle blazing. He had to reach the detonator, had to trigger the charges before it was too late. Vrax intercepted him, the Talaxian commander's wrist blades flashing. Rodriguez parried the blow with his rifle, the force of the impact numbing his arms. He lashed out with a kick, but Vrax was too fast, dodging the blow and countering with a slash that cut deep into Rodriguez's thigh. Rodriguez stumbled, his leg buckling. Vrax loomed over him, his wrist blades poised for the kill. "See you in hell," he said, and triggered the detonator. The explosives detonated with a roar, the lab disintegrating in a firestorm of plasma and debris. The ship at the center of the room vanished in a blinding flash, its reactor core going critical and consuming itself. Rodriguez felt the heat wash over him, felt the shockwave lift him and hurl him across the room. He slammed into a wall, his bones shattering, his organs rupturing. But as the darkness closed in, He saw his team fighting their way towards him, the surviving UTF soldiers battling through the flames and the wreckage. They reached him, gathering his broken body, and started to carry him out of the inferno. The last thing Rodriguez saw was the Talaxian research base, collapsing in on itself, secondary explosions chaining through its structure. Then the darkness took him, and he knew no more. The UTF soldiers burst from the base, Rodriguez's body cradled between them. They ran for the dropship, plasma bolts and razor discs chasing them as the surviving shadow guards emerged from the ruins. They reached the ship, piling inside, sealing the hatch behind them. The pilot, his face grim, fired the engines and the craft leaped into the sky, clawing for space. Behind them, the moon base erupted in a final cataclysmic explosion, a pillar of fire and smoke rising into the void. The shockwave caught the dropship, sending it tumbling, but the pilot wrestled with the controls and stabilized the craft. In the passenger compartment, the soldiers laid Rodriguez's body on the deck, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion. They had completed their mission, struck a blow against the Talaxian war machine, but the cost had been high, almost too high to bear. As the dropship raced back towards the Indomitable, the soldiers sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their own memories of the friends and comrades they had lost. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Green watched the explosion blossom on the view screen, a bright flare against the darkness of space. He knew, without being told, that the mission had been a success, that the Talaxian weapon had been destroyed. But he also knew that success had come at a price. Lieutenant Rodriguez and his team had given their lives to strike this blow, to give humanity a fighting chance in this war. Green's hand tightened on his battered copy of The Art of War, the ancient pages crinkling under his fingers. He had sent those men to their deaths, had ordered them into the fire, and now he had to live with the consequences. The Indomitable turned, its engines flaring, and set a course for UTF space. The battle had been won, but the war raged on, and Captain Patrick Green knew that there would be more sacrifices to come, more hard choices to make before the end. The dropship shuddered as it punched through New Hope's atmosphere, the hull glowing red-hot from the friction. Captain Green checked his plasma rifle, the weapon humming with barely contained energy. Beside him, a squad of battle-hardened Marines sat in grim silence, their faces lit by the pulsing red light of the drop pod's interior. The pod slammed into the ground, the impact rattling Green's teeth. The hatch blew open and the Marines poured out, plasma rifles at the ready. Green followed, his book tucked securely into his combat webbing. The scene outside was chaos. UTF defenders fought desperately against the onslaught of Talaxian troops, the air thick with plasma fire and the screams of the dying. Talaxian landing craft disgorged more soldiers, their black armor glinting in the sun. Green led his squad into the fray, his rifle spitting bolts of searing blue energy. He moved with a fluid grace, dodging enemy fire and snapping off precise shots. Around him, Marines fell, their armor smoking from plasma hits. Overhead, the Indomitable roared through the sky, its guns raining destruction on the Talaxian forces. Drop pods fell like meteors, smashing into the ground and disgorging more UTF reinforcements. Green and his squad fought their way to the colony's defensive line, stepping over the bodies of fallen humans and Talaxians alike. The defenders cheered as they saw Green, their morale soaring at the sight of the legendary captain fighting alongside them. With the reinforcements and air support from the Indomitable, the tide of the battle began to turn. UTF Marines pushed the Talaxians back, retaking ground inch by bloody inch. Amidst the carnage, a hush fell over the battlefield. Sci-Fi Zorak strode forward, his black armor splattered with human blood. He pointed his wrist blades at Green, his voice booming across the battlefield. "Captain Green, I challenge you to single combat. Face me if you have the courage." Green stepped forward, handing his rifle to a nearby Marine. He drew a combat knife from his belt, the blade glinting in the sun. "I accept your challenge, Zorax." The two leaders circled each other, the battle raging around them. Zorax lunged, his wrist blades flashing. Green dodged, his knife darting out to score a line across the Talaxian's armor. They clashed again and again, blades sparking, armor denting under the furious blows. Green fought with a cold precision, his movements economical and deadly. Zorax was a whirlwind of rage, his attacks powerful, but wild. As they locked blades, Zorax's eyes fell on the book tucked into Green's webbing. He sneered, his face inches from Green's. Green headbutted the Talaxian, shattering his nose. Zorax staggered back, dark blood streaming down his face. "That book has more wisdom than you could ever comprehend, Zorax," Green said, wiping blood from his own face. "It's the wisdom of warriors who fought and died long before either of us were born." Zorax roared and charged again, his wrist blades aimed at Green's heart. Green sidestepped, his knife flashing up to slice through the tendons in Zorax's wrist. The Talaxian howled in pain, his hand hanging useless. Green pressed the attack, his knife a blur of silver. Zorax fell back, desperately parrying the human's blows with his remaining blade. Around them, the UTF forces surged forward, heartened by the sight of their captain beating the Talaxian leader. Green saw an opening and lunged, his knife plunging into Zorax's chest, piercing the Talaxian's heart. Zorax's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening in a silent scream. He toppled backwards, Green's knife buried to the hilt in his chest. A great cry went up from the UTF forces as they saw Zorax fall. The Talaxians faltered, their will to fight vanishing with their leader's death. They broke and ran, fleeing back to their landing craft. Green stood over Zorax's body, his chest heaving, his uniform torn and blood-stained. He reached down and pulled his knife free, the blade dripping with Talaxian blood. Green grunted in pain, his uniform soaked with blood from a dozen wounds, but he didn't falter, his knife flashing in the sun as he pressed his attack on Zorax. The Talaxian leader snarled, his remaining wrist blade sparking as it clashed against Green's knife. Around them, the battle raged on, human and Talaxian locked in mortal combat. Plasma fire seared the air, the screams of the wounded and dying a constant soundtrack. Green saw an opening and lunged, his knife slicing through the tendons in Zorax's wrist. The Talaxian howled in pain, his blade clattering to the ground. Green kicked him in the chest, sending him sprawling. Before Zorax could recover, Green was on him, his knife at the alien's throat. He held up his battered book, its pages fluttering in the wind. "Hild," Green growled, "your forces are broken, your weapon is destroyed, you have lost." Zorax glared at him with hate-filled eyes, but he saw the truth in Green's words. Around them the Talaxian lines were crumbling, the human defenders surging forward with renewed vigor. "I yield," Zorax spat, the words bitter on his tongue. A cheer went up from the human forces as they saw Zorax's surrender. They pressed their attack, driving the Talaxians back to their ships. Plasma fire chased the retreating aliens, felling many before they could reach safety. Green stepped back from Zorax, keeping his knife trained on the defeated leader. He activated his comm with his free hand. "Indomitable, this is Green. The Talaxians are retreating. Pursue and destroy their ships, don't let them escape." "Aye, Captain," came the response. High above, the Indomitable and the rest of the UTF fleet moved to intercept the fleeing Talaxian vessels. The human ships, armed with new weapons reverse-engineered from the destroyed Talaxian research base, tore into the enemy fleet with ruthless efficiency. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Green watched the space battle unfold on the view screen. UTF ships danced around the lumbering Talaxian vessels, picking them off with precise strikes. The Talaxian ships, their morale broken by Zorax's defeat, put up a feeble resistance. Green watched in horror as several Talaxian ships, ignoring the UTF fire raking their hulls, ploughed straight into the human fleet. One rammed the UTF frigate Relentless, the two ships exploding in a blinding flash. Another collided with the cruiser Dauntless, shearing off its port side and sending it spinning out of control. The UTF fleet scattered, trying to evade the kamikaze attacks. Point defense guns filled space with flak, desperately trying to knock out the Talaxian ships before they could make impact. But it wasn't enough. Ship after ship fell to the suicide runs, the Talaxian crews fanatically loyal to Zorax even in defeat. The UTF fleet was being decimated, the cost of victory growing with every passing second. Green gripped the arms of his command chair, knuckles white. The Indomitable shuddered as a nearby frigate exploded, the shockwave buffeting the larger ship. Finally, mercifully, it was over. The last Talaxian ship was destroyed, the few survivors limping away into warp. The UTF had won the day, but at a terrible price. The bridge was silent, save for the soft beeping of damage reports coming in. Green looked around at his crew, their faces haggard and shell-shocked. Many were wounded, their uniforms stained with blood and soot. Green looked down at the book in his lap. It was battered and scorched, stained with his own blood and the blood of his enemies. The ancient wisdom contained within its pages had guided him through the war, had given him the strength and insight to lead his people to victory. But as he surveyed the devastation on the viewscreen, the broken ships and bodies floating in the void, he wondered if that wisdom had been worth the cost. How many had died today, on both sides? How many more would die before the war was finally over? Green closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every life lost pressing down on him. They had won the battle, but the war raged on, and he knew, deep in his bones, that the true cost of victory was yet to be paid. The UTF ships hung in the void, the battlefield littered with debris and the silent hulks of destroyed ships. In the distance, the blue-green orb of New Hope glowed, the planet's surface scarred by the fires of war. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Green surveyed the damage report scrolling across his screen. The ship had taken heavy damage, its hull breached in a dozen places, its weapons systems and engines strained to the breaking point. But she had survived, a testament to the skill and determination of her crew. Green stood, his uniform torn and stained, his face haggard with exhaustion and grief. He looked around at his bridge crew, seeing the same weariness and sorrow etched on their faces. They had lost so many today, friends and comrades who had fought and died beside them. He activated the ship-wide intercom, his voice heavy but resolute. "Attention all crew, this is the captain. Today we have won a great victory. We have broken the Talaxian invasion, destroyed their secret weapon, and captured their leader. But our victory has come at a great cost." He paused, his eyes falling on the empty stations around the bridge, the seats of those who would never return. "We have lost many brave souls today, friends, brothers, sisters in arms. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten. Their names will be etched in the annals of history, remembered forever as the heroes who gave their lives for the survival of our species." Green's hand tightened on the intercom, his voice growing stronger. "But we cannot let their deaths be in vain. We must honor their memory by continuing the fight, by driving the Talaxians back to their own space and ensuring that their sacrifice was not for nothing. We will grieve, we will mourn, but we will not falter, we will not fail. As long as one human heart still beats, as long as one UTF ship still flies, we will not surrender." He looked down at the book in his hand, its pages stained with blood and sweat. In the pages of this book, the ancient wisdom of Sun Tzu, it is written, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." Today, we have shown the Talaxians the truth of these words. We have broken their will to fight, shattered their belief in their own superiority, and in doing so, we have taken the first step towards ending this war once and for all. Green raised his head, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "So let us tend to our wounded, repair our ships, and honor our dead. But let us also remember the task that still lies ahead. The road to victory will be long and hard, paved with blood and sacrifice, but we will walk it together, united in our resolve, unwavering in our purpose, for we are the United Terran Federation, and we will never back down, never surrender, until the stars themselves are ours." He cut the transmission, the bridge falling silent. The crew looked at each other, their grief and exhaustion tempered by a renewed sense of purpose. They had a long way to go, but they would face it together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of shared struggle and sacrifice. Green sat back in his command chair, his gaze drawn to the viewport and the endless expanse of stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the Talaxian fleet was regrouping, licking its wounds and preparing for the next battle. And beyond them, countless other dangers lurked in the vast reaches of space, unknown threats waiting to test the resolve of humanity. But for now, in this moment, they had achieved a victory. A costly, bitter victory, but a victory nonetheless. And as long as they held on to that, as long as they remembered the sacrifices of those who had fallen, they would never lose hope. They would never stop fighting, never stop pushing forward, until the universe itself was theirs to claim. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.